Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Kron, and I'm BPOC's Digital Operations and Collections Information Analyst. And here with me today, I have BPOC CEO Nik Honeysett as my co-host. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and welcome to the third episode of BPOC's Dreaming of Digital Asset Management webinar series. Now, in today's episode, we've invited 3 DAM professionals to share with us their work in the DAM field. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I'd like to mention that we will open our discussion up for a Q&A about 10 to 15 minutes before the end. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A section and feel free to comment or discuss in the chat. Today's session, as you know, will be recorded. If you're having any difficulty with the transcription service, Otter AI, please let me know. Now for our speakers. First up, we have Milo Thiesen. He's the Senior Media Asset Manager in the Office of Knowledge and Legacy at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, Incorporated. For 15 years, they have specialized in media archiving and digital asset management for photography, video interactives, and animation and cultural heritage and higher education. Milo was lead technical analyst for digital asset management at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for 5 years and has held positions in digital asset management at the American Museum of Natural History and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Milo has guest lectured at Pratt Institute, New York University, and the Metropolitan New York Library Council. Next, we have Jessica Herczeg-Konecny. She is the lead technical analyst for digital asset management at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Prior to that, she was the digital asset manager at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Jessica has 15 years of experience in the museum industry at 10 organizations, including roles in archives, collections management, rights and reproductions, and digital asset management. She has a BA in English and American Culture Studies from Washington University in St. Louis, and a master's in public history from Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. And last but certainly not least, we have Robin-Elise. She is the digital assets manager at the Natural History Museum of Utah. Previous roles she has had include web admin and communications manager for Association for Utah Community Health, digitization technician and processor in special collections at J. Willard Marriott Library, collections manager at Utah Museum of Fine Arts, and she holds a BA in Fine Arts, Drawing and Painting, and English Language and Literature, and a Master of Education in Instructional Design and Educational Technology. Thank you all 3 of you for being here today. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences with us. As I've shared in your introductions, all 3 of you have extensive experience in digital asset management, and we've worked with a couple of you on projects with BPOC. And I'm really excited to hear more about your work. I know we've had conversations as we've worked with you on our projects, but I'm excited to hear more and learn more. So I'd love for each of you to share your work in digital asset management at your current organizations, even previous positions if you'd like, since I know Milo, you used to be at the Met as Jessica is there now. And also if you could share any challenges, opportunities that you've experienced and what you would like to see, going forward into the future of DAM and digital asset management systems for that matter. So why don't we start with Milo and then we'll hear from Jessica and Robin-Elise.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here and in conversation with both of my sort of cross-institutional colleagues, as I like to say here. So I'm, as Alex said, I'm the Senior Media Asset Manager at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, and I use they, them pronouns. So just like to put that out there. I have a blurred background. I have short kind of light brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a striped shirt that has a label that says creature, because sometimes I like to be called that too. So what is Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts? That's always a question that people have when they start working there. And it's the campus in New York City, which is a premier performing arts organization. And there's a bunch of different constituent organizations. I'm not going to list all of them, but it includes, us, and we do our own programming. So right now we're promoting Summer for the City, which is going to be a bunch of outdoor festivals and music and dancing. So it's free this summer. If you're in New York, please come hang out. And it's also, the Metropolitan Opera and New York City Ballet and New York Philharmonic, et cetera, et cetera. There's many more. Juilliard. We are focusing our DAM program first on Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, artistic programming specifically, with the eye to create kind of a framework that could be extended as a service to our other constituent organizations if they don't already have a DAM program. But most of them operate as kind of like an independent institution. And so many of them already have even more developed DAMs programs that have already existed if they have like a longer standing archive. So it's been a really interesting project coming in. I've been there since last March, March 2021. And when I came, I was told I was setting up a new DAMS, which is sort of true and sort of not true at the same time. There was an old digital asset management system that had sort of been sunset, but was still being like paid for, and it was still in existence, but no one was actively using it. And so I came to understand that that would also involve a pretty major migration of that information and reconciliation of that information, which I wasn't expecting, but has been certainly a unique challenge. So that includes things like the entire Live from Lincoln Center catalog, which was a PBS series, 40 years of broadcast history. We have those tapes stored like in many, many different formats that basically represent the entire, change in technology over that 40 years. So everything from like 2-inch tape to film to Betacam to U-matic to a bunch of born digital stuff that's on hard drives manufactured between 2006 and 2019. So it's a lot. And a lot of that was in the old DAMs, but there was like rips from DVDs and like a bunch of different things floating around. Which primary file is the primary, and we're trying to move away from using master as the language. So that's what, when I say primary, I mean master, if you haven't heard that used interchangeably before. So that's the fun puzzle that we're definitely digging through. Performing arts has extremely complex rights and permissions information that it ranges from the artist rights to the union considerations to every creator that was involved in something like an opera, and then every creator that was involved in filming it. So a lot of times those things were only really licensed for like a couple of years, but we get a lot of requests, and then we have to go back and do kind of like risk analysis and a rights assessment on a case-by-case basis for a lot of those. So trying to make that information more accessible, including making available all the production files to try to like make those reviews a little bit more smooth has been a large part of my work. And then also developing like work in progress processes for the marketing team, and just doing a lot of process mapping. I did a lot of UX exercises about the folder structure and taxonomy and what kinds of information people need. And then I tried to look at the data landscape across different systems that were in use, which data points were already being entered in other places, and were there integration opportunities, or is there kind of an opportunity to think about how the organization uses data? Honestly, they have in the past been like, it's very fast there, which is very different than working at the museum. And it was almost like, I wanted a shift, like, and so it's been like really interesting change because everything moves at high speed, and it's really hard to kind of wrangle that and like get people to slow down a little bit and start thinking about data, because they're just trying to make like the next performances happen for the summer, so it's been a super fun challenge. But having the experience at the Met where like I gained so much insight there for seeing how photography was well managed for over 100 years, that it's really, really great to be able to like come in and apply those principles to something. And it does translate across the board for photography, and even a lot for video as well. So I don't want to, I can talk forever about metadata, you know, when someone like gets you talking about dams, I don't want to take up too much space. So just let me know when you want me to pass it off, or would this be a good time other folks to jump in?
Yeah, we can transition over to Jessica. Thank you for that, Milo. So we can hear a little bit more about the Met. And I have to second what Carly said in the chat. I love the change in vocabulary from master to primary. I mean, even just those little things in changing how we talk about our processes and file naming and things like that is huge. So I'm going to pass it over to Jessica now. Sure. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much to Alex and Nik for the invite. And I have Milo's previous position at the Met. So I have been a part of, I think this is my 4th dam system, and the Met is very, very mature. So they actually migrated to the current system back in 2015, but they had a system before. And I was used to a much kind of scrappier situation. I was at the Chicago History Museum and then the Detroit Institute of Arts. And so I've kind of seen both sides of trying to, I know the previous webinar was all about dam without a dam system. So I've seen that side of it to a very well-established, well integrated into business processes for a lot of the departments at the institution. I mean, there is, I'm part of a team. There are more than one digital asset management specialist. We have someone who is focused on cataloging. We have someone who really oversees. There's just this amazing integration between the imaging department, what they're doing. They upload directly to the dam, and it is amazing and incredible. And it's a lot of people who, it's just part of their day-to-day work. And we have someone who oversees that, because as we all know, it's not set it and forget it. You still need people to actually QA this, monitor for errors. And then we also have people, someone who is working on working with contributors for new content coming in, and the workflows and processes that will entail. It's always an interesting negotiation. You know, you have to use some of your soft skills to teach people what DAM is. And you have to be very pragmatic and practical, what will actually work and what might be fantastical. Like, yes, we all wish we lived in an ideal world for some of this, and we could just wave our magic wands and people will just do what they need to do. And a lot of it's evaluating pain points. We'll have a process in place and that you've worked it out with the contributors, but they're not using the workflows. And so it's our job to investigate why. Part of the challenge is thinking about this overall governance work, like scope and what is our system and what isn't it, what's appropriate to go in, what might not be, or what you could do, but you really don't have the bandwidth for. And that's really hard when you're trying to do your day-to-day work, I have learned a lot. I've been at the Met for 8 months, and it has been just chock full of a lot to learn about the institution, about the specific system. There has been a lot of automation that has been done, but you know, it's a challenge to keep it up. Yeah, and so maybe I'll pass it off now to Robin-Elise, sorry, and then we can get into, I do want to talk about actual data migration at some point. So
yes, after Robin-Elise has a chance to talk, I'd like for the three of you to kind of talk a little bit about, you know, more of the challenges that you guys are experiencing with the actual systems that you've been using, because I know in our previous session we talked about doing digital asset management without a DAMS, so it would be great to hear about that. So I will pass it over to Robin-Elise now.
Hey there. So I am at the Natural History Museum of Utah, and I would say we are in a scrappy phase still. It's been discussed for some time having a digital asset management system, and we are associated with the University of Utah, so there have been some things that have assisted us in moving towards that, and other things that create barriers because we have to work within the university system as well. But I am the first person who's been hired to work on this stuff. And so it's a brand new role. I mean, I guess now it's been 2.5 years, but it still feels brand new because a lot of the infrastructure wasn't already in place. So what we do is we work with our university library and use a home-built system that the J. Willard Marriott Library developed using other digital library processes and systems, and they created a tool that assists us with ingestion. And so part of what we're doing is working with a system that isn't necessarily bells and whistles, doesn't have automation built in, doesn't have the UI that a lot of people are expecting. I mean, it's very much working in a database, and what comes out on the other side is very lovely. But for people who are uncomfortable with those kind of dry systems, it's hard to get people working in them. And so there's been a lot of education and a lot of one-on-one discussions about why we don't put things on personal drives, why we don't have things in like on external hard drives, what things are being backed up, which aren't. Our old shared common drive space is what we're trying to move away from, and what's the difference between a cloud and your desktop. And so we're really kind of in the weeds with a lot of that granular information about how to name files, what kind of file types are less lossy, and then even just helping people understand what metadata is. I use the example of Instagram all the time. Like, you've heard of a hashtag, right? Similar principle. If you put it in, you might be able to find it that way. So that's kind of an overview. It's also been interesting going from an art museum to a natural history museum. Collections are handled a little bit differently. There's a lot of data that was unfamiliar to me before. And a lot of what we are doing now is working within collections to try and create relationships between our multiple collections management systems and our data aggregators, which are not always wanting to talk to each other. So we're learning a lot about APIs. We're learning a lot about re-ingestion. We are educating that sometimes imagery is important. It's not the other data that's the only thing that's important to people. And so we also spend a lot of time across the museum talking about what has historical value for the institution as a whole, the museum as well as the university. Because some people have the urge to just toss it all, and other people are wanting to keep it all. And we don't need 6 iterations of the same thing. We just need the best one. I'll pass it along to the next topic.
Yeah, thank you for that, Robin-Elise. And I'm going to open this up to all three of you, so feel free to chime in if you want to speak to this. As I mentioned earlier, I'd love to hear about, just your challenges or even opportunities that you've experienced with your digital asset management systems that you've been working, whether currently or even, in previous positions. Yeah, just talk. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And if there's anything that you would like to see, in digital asset management systems going forward into the future.
I really liked what you just said, Robin, about what did you say, the dry interface? Because I've found that there's a lot of young people on staff at Lincoln Center, and I'm sort of like, a geriatric millennial or something. That's what I've heard. But that's what I'm called, I guess. But there's a lot of Gen Z folks coming into the workforce, and I think it's been really interesting trying to onboard a new system. A lot of dams have older interfaces and have a lot, like they're smaller tech companies generally, at least the ones that I've used in cultural heritage. And a lot of times there's like technical debt that the company's still trying to catch up and trying to make like a reactive interface, and people aren't used to seeing so much information on one screen. They might not have worked in a database before at all, or maybe a little bit in college, or they've only worked in spreadsheets. And so they're used to apps that look like, toy candy and just kind of guide you through whatever you need to do. And there's a lot more kind of decision making that one needs to do in most digital asset management interfaces. So I think I'm really excited to see where the tools go in terms of like investing more in UX and catching up a little bit in terms of like user experience, feedback, and also having data update kind of more in real time, not so much like refreshing of pages. And I've experienced that in many, many different DAMS systems. So I don't know if you guys have run into that at all, but as like the younger folks enter the workforce, I feel like I'm like sounding like this is elder now, but like, as like new people come into using digital asset management systems, it's managing the expectations around like what the interface is going to do, how it's going to behave, where things need to go, how to understand and even like make visual sense of what's on the screen. I found that especially because a lot of folks we're working with are like artists and creators and dancers, and they, they're very visual and they feel the technology, and a database often gives you that like dryness. And so it's like, how do you convince them to use this thing that isn't like giving any emotion back? So I'm excited to work with our vendor right now as kind of working on UX stuff for the next release. So I'm super excited to see that. But I would love to hear your guys' thoughts about that. If you've had better or worse experiences with UX, or if you've made changes in your UI to kind of like help with that.
I mean, we've talked, especially at DIA, about the search functionality. And, you had mentioned, you were just talking about decision making and, how do you use, what kinds of language are we using for these assets? How are people actually searching now? What kinds of like actual words are they wanting to put in? Which is, when you're talking about integration with your collection management system, it's all very intellectual and also like very vetted. So how do you have a, who's doing the work of cataloging and putting in all of this information? How I've never worked on a crowdsourced project, so that just makes me really nervous, like opening, just as a manager, opening it up to just anyone. But are there ways to get more feedback from more people, especially contributors? How are they searching for, and what kinds of information could they be adding to assets? It also keeping in mind that that's extra work. I mean, we're talking about extra work for people, and are there easier ways to accomplish that, accommodate that? So it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think the language component is really interesting to me. I mean, when you're working in the museum environment, you're also dealing with this language from past generations, from colonial structures, from like the decision making of the collector, and so trying to isolate what some of that language has been and reframe it so it's more digestible in today's times is a lot of what I spend my time thinking about as I'm trying to go to sleep at night. And I mean, that's also hard to get some people to wrap their heads around. Um, like, this is how it was, and this is how it needs to stay, is the way a lot of people feel. But I think it is really interesting to look into layers um, of vocabulary that you can put on top of things and say, it was once this, this is the intermediary language, and this is the preferred language in our time now. And the expectation is that change is guaranteed. Nothing is static in this universe. So that is also difficult to get people to get on board with, because I work with a lot of people who think in very linear ways. And so to be able to help people transition beyond what they've always known is tricky. When it comes to like the visuals and making our databases more pleasant, we're not there yet. Um, so I have definitely had more success with people who are really used to working in spreadsheets all the time. They're like, no big deal. It's a whole bunch of numbers. We're good. We'll take it down. We'll put it back up. We'll add this other thing. Fine. A lot of the scientists are great at that. What we struggle more with are also people who produce a lot of creative material. Because they are used to presenting a final product. And yes, a database is garbage in, garbage out, right? At the same time, if there's nothing in there, you're not going to get anything at all. So I would rather put things in with minimal metadata and develop that over time than to not have things in there at all.
Yeah, sometimes step one is just like getting someone to upload something. And then it's like, okay, can you do these 2 fields? And then you can like keep introducing like a few new fields and try to get them in there like that. Another thing that I've noticed in dams in general, I guess, is that many, depending on which one you go with, I think I've worked with 4 or 5 different systems. You know, they have different ways of handling hierarchical metadata and many-to-many relationships. And performance data is almost all many-to-many relationships. And so trying to make that fit into the constraints of a system that was developed for like stock photography or something like that, where it's very IPTC and it's flat. I know at the Met, that was definitely like solved with just like prefixes to all these different field names. But I've been trying to catalog kind of like on an entity level, because I am working in a system that has a little bit more support for these different kinds of relationships, but I'm used to working in the flat constraint. So I've had to kind of like shift how my brain is imagining the data and documenting it, and everything that I kind of got comfortable in at the museums being challenged. So that's been it's been hard and fun. Yeah. So
can you say what system you're using, Milo?
Right now we're using Orange Logic by Cortex. Their DAM is called Cortex.
We should probably do a roll call of systems that people are using. That might be helpful. So what other ones have you used, Milo?
Well, let's see, NetX. I've used Widen. I've used Resource Space and Extensus Portfolio.
Your turn, Jessica.
I've used Portfolio, Piction, Widen, and yeah, now we're on NetX.
And Robin-Elise, you have a university custom developed one, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We have not used any commonly named vendors. but I'm familiar with a lot of them. And we have sometimes brought features to our library to say, can we do this thing? And they've been really open to exploring, trying to do other things. One of the things we are currently working on is creating visualization for 3D assets, and both being able to view them, but also store all the components, whether they've been rendered or the raw formats. So that's one of our current projects, and that was something they hadn't even really thought about before we started talking. So
we should hook you up with Haley Majewski over at the Cleveland Natural, or the Museum of Natural History. She was on our previous session. They're working on a lot of 3D renderings of their collections right now. So awesome. Remind me, I'll hook you guys up after this cool. Session.
Carly, sorry, Alex, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, I was just saying, sorry, I'll let you go, Jessica.
Oh yeah, oh no, I just saw that Carly in the chat put, who's one of my colleagues, put in a plug for resource space, and that brings up a good point. I worked at 2 institutions previously that were, our IT partners were adamant against open source. So, you know, sometimes it's just a non-starter from the beginning. Yeah, so I just, putting that out there.
Yeah, we still battle with that in our community, the whole open source question. And it's invariably the IT department, not casting any aspersions on IT people who are listening, but it's often there's not a high comfort level with an open source system. I have a question, which is based on yours, Jessica, saying, and actually for everybody. So you said you're now in this kind of mature environment. I'm kind of interested how you describe that as a mature environment, and I'm particularly interested in, is there kind of institutional recognition that there is this managed environment for assets, and so if I'm in a department and I scan something, I put it in, or do you still struggle with just, you know, distributed kind of shadow asset repositories everywhere?
No, I don't want to make it sound like everybody on board at the Met, or everybody at the Met is on board. I think and everything just automatically goes into the system. I didn't mean to insinuate that. Mostly because our team just wouldn't be able to handle all of that. And some of it is this discussion about what's actual digital archiving versus digital asset management. You know, some things just shouldn't go into the system. And maybe, you know, we've talked a lot recently on the team about auditing the assets. Maybe there are assets that are in there that don't need to be there anymore, or either they can be deleted because they're someplace else, they're being saved someplace else, or could they be put in the cold storage, you know, and move to a more actual archive. You know, that's something else we all need to get on board with, what shared language about what is an archive and what it's not. So, and we are actively having new contributors add content. So not everything. So I guess what I mean by mature is it is a recognized resource. People are regularly adding, requesting training. You know, as you are onboarded to the Met, you know, for fellows and interns, yeah, the imaging department, I mean, it's really fantastic what is happening with the photography department. I can't stress that enough. yeah, so it's been, I don't know how to explain the jump. Like, and I just feel like I'm not, like, IT gets it and gets what we're trying to do. And there seems to be a better relationship with IT. I really want to give a shout out to the people working at the DIA, because it is a challenge to work on getting buy-in and institutional support. And yeah, sorry, I just ran out.
No, that's actually a great transition.
I will say, yeah, I do want to say something that might be controversial, but I just feel like there's no real wrong way to dam, right? Like, I mean, there is, but you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to back out of things. You'll have some crazy file naming convention that's not going to work. Sometimes you just have to let people do their thing, and they'll see that their workflow's not going to be great, but you just kind of have to let them do it. I have definitely made mistakes. I've been convinced into things. I'm like, oh, like 5 years later, I'm like, I really shouldn't have done that. But and you got to work with your people. And I just really, I don't know if Megan's on the call, but Megan Finch, thank you. She really helped me when we were moving to a new system, like rethink roles. And we ended up layering roles, rethink access to, who needs what kind of access, like what buckets are we creating. And it's really, I cannot stress enough how amazing it has been to walk into a situation where there's all of this information in Confluence. Like the team over at the Met is so dedicated to documenting decisions and how the decisions were made. And here's step by step how to do things. And so I really encourage, I mean, I'm a big spreadsheet person. Whatever you do, Google Docs, Confluence, even if it's just Word documents, as long as they don't, when you leave, they aren't automatically deleted. Just make sure that like somebody else has a copy of it, because like permissions. But anyway, just like document it. Just like start writing things down, and you'll save yourself so much trouble later. Who decided what, when, why, how? It takes time. It takes a lot of time, but it's worth it.
This is actually a great transition to one of my last questions I was going to ask before the Q&As. If any of you have, advice, recommendations for people in the audience or people who are listening in, who are either just, standing up a new digital asset management system or getting started and putting together, digital asset management policies and procedures. All three of you have a lot of experience in, as Jessica was just saying, trial and errors. So if you have any advice, recommendations, it'd be great to hear them.
Well, I can jump in here for a second. I may be in a unique situation because I'm actually housed within the IT department, but my background is in collections. And at least for me, that allowed me to create a lot of trust that might not have been there within our collections and research department, because at least I understood the legal aspects of having a collection. And I had worked through the process of having iterations of digital works of art and how and why you could not display multiples at the same time, even though people wanted to. And so I feel like even though it is new for our institution, what has been really helpful for me is that I'm working across every department within the museum. And I have the collections and research team on my side, and they're already great at documentation. They have a long history of keeping up with that. And so it's been really easy to use them as guinea pigs and show how things can be done, and allow that as an opportunity for people to copy and use already existing structures. But I also really want people to have ownership over their own material and their own workflows, because I'm not trying to push people into doing the opposite of what they're used to doing. I want them to feel like this becomes part of their regular process. And, we're not there with everybody, but a lot of people are starting to get it. And the other piece that I feel is really important is that, like Jessica said, mistakes are going to happen. None of this is going to be perfect. Sometimes I say that museums work 200 years behind, but in other ways they work 200 years ahead. And none of it's going to be perfect, and there's no real timeline for this. This is an endless process, and so much of it is really just a culture shift. It's not just learning a new tool. It's learning how to think about your material differently and your assets differently, and how do you want to find them? And if you can't find them currently, what do you need to do so they can be found? So next.
I would add, that things in like having the dams in the IT department's amazing, and having those relationships with your IT partners is really, really important. And that's definitely been a challenge. I think that like all institutions have, it's the Great Resignation, and there's so much shifting in staff and people right now across the board. And so like trying your best to, when new people come, like schedule coffees. We're all working remotely a lot more, or many of us are, scheduling like short, check-ins with folks, especially if there's like, if things aren't going well, trying to check in with people. Sometimes that can be really difficult if someone's had a negative experience and you're remote and you can't kind of go in person and be like, hey, like, what's really going on here? There's like, everyone has a lot less bandwidth to kind of be patient with our collective trauma of the last 2 or 3 years, and so just, I think, trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, be generous, like reach out and try to be a little bit more personal. I think that can go a long way. And I have work to do on that front too, because I think we're all just like, trying to get our projects done, and coming into new organizations remotely, it's like those relationships are much harder to form. But one thing that I really liked about the Met system, and it sounds like you might have some of that at the Natural History Museum too, is like, is that there was established systems to use to document your work, and there was established places that people go to put things, and there was like established people that were assigned to help you with like XYZ, and so that mature piece was like very grounding. And I feel appreciative of Jessica for recognizing the work that went in, and I've been trying to do that now, but it's been interesting, like having something just starting and scrappier. Like we're not really ready to land in a place where I can document everything yet, so I've been doing at least more short videos and trying to do a more a less dry way of doing it. I think in the complex integrations that are there, you need those like step-by-step instructions, but for just like, how do I upload a file, like trying to keep it to like 30 seconds or a minute or something like really digestible that someone can watch remotely has been like a newer type of documentation that I've been trying out. That's been really nice too.
Yeah, those I just lost it. The infographics that were shared out at the first webinar were very cool. I'm like, yeah, these one pagers. I know I had created a 1 page like copyright. It's so hard, like condensing copyright into like an infographic, but just a reminder to, and I know a lot of you out there don't have rights and repro staff and you're trying to do it yourself, but just and it's very copyright is very, very tricky, very, very hard. You don't want to get your institution in trouble. But you also want to assert your rights with fair use. So yeah, just a reminder to and also work with your network. There are, I don't even know how many like half-hour conversations I've had over the years where people just reach out and say like, hey, can I just pick your brain for 25 minutes? It ends up being an hour because we start complaining, but you know. But definitely work your network, because we are all we're all facing the similar, it's just a matter of scale, right? You know, sometimes you have a huge, it's always a big project, but if it's just you working on it, it's, yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to just kind of add here is one of the things that I would really like to do more of is adding the technical skill sets to a lot more job descriptions so people consider it part of their role. And we obviously always have people that rise to the top. They're excited to learn new things. They're already kind of savvy with a lot of electronic tools out there. And so they're excited about it. But there are a lot of people that are like, I'm already overwhelmed with what I've got. And what I would really like to work on more is, as we bring new people into the museum, that all of those new descriptions add these components of, if you don't already know it, these are the ways that you can learn it. These are the tools we have available so that you can kind of help shape how all of this changes. I mean, we have a number of people at our institution who have been there over 20 years. So, you know, that will change. There will be new people and an appreciation for understanding that this will eventually be part of everyone's role. This is part of what everyone will be expected to do. So we're working on it. We're not there yet, but.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point, Robin-Elise, about onboarding processes, especially when, you know, knowledge is leaving your institution and you have new staff coming in to replace them, and being able to pass that on to new staff to make sure that, you know, not only are they prepared to enter that position, but succeed as well. So we are about 13 minutes before 9 o'clock our time. So I'm going to open it up for Q&A. Thank you, the three of you. It's been so great to hear about the different perspectives from your different disciplines and how you guys are managing your digital assets. So we don't have any questions just yet. Nik, do you have anything you want to ask while we're waiting?
You kidding? You already know the answer to that.
It's a yes.
So Milo, I'm really interested. So you went from albeit an encyclopedic museum collection to performing arts. I'm interested in, have you learned anything from a performing arts perspective that would apply to kind of more regular collections, I guess, in the museum world? No is a totally acceptable answer.
I think I'm still learning. I mean,
did you have to conceptually, did you have to kind of rethink about managing assets, particularly from, you talked about there's an increasing need for kind of hierarchical structures?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. This goes for collections too, though. But, you know, we always, with the collection photography at the Met, it was like generally one object record is linked to one image, or, you know, there was a primary object picture that was linked to one image, or, you know, it was very kind of set in the way that people needed things to run for a large portion of the organization. And so you knew what to do. And there's a lot less of I mean, I know what to do. Like, there's event photography is like straightforward. I've been really lucky that we actually had a little bit of a shift in our reporting. So I'm in the Office of Knowledge and Legacy, which is the archives and records management. And we now report into our legal department. And so actually have a lot of support from our legal team in terms, so right now we're doing something that was really difficult to get done at the museum, which is working with the legal team to change our photographer contracts and try to encourage or potentially require, we're still in a pilot phase, so we're not sure where this is going to land because we need it to be a good experience for our photographer. But the idea right now that we're piloting is to try to get our event photographers to upload directly to the dam, to use a set naming convention, and to embed a certain subset of metadata that's provided. We provide them with the event information. And that was something I know I worked with some colleagues over at MoMA, and they had a really good process. So I kind of brought that in, but I think that was something that was always sort of a peripheral goal at the Met that was harder to get done there for some reason. I think it was just the reporting structure and silo, and really the focus of the team is in the dams there is in collection information. So event photography was like a little bit like, yes, the dams can have that, but is this the thing that we're focused on at the moment? So it's been exciting to have support from the legal team, to have them come in and help us create different types of rights profiles. Those are definitely much more complicated, and we're working on building those out now. So it's, thinking about how much of that information we want to keep in the dams. A lot of it's done in documents and spreadsheets and other databases, and like, what exactly do we need to see in terms of like all of the complex rights in a performance in the dams versus where it's living in all these other systems. So that is very challenging, but it's a fun puzzle. So I think bringing some of that thinking back to the museum world, and maybe it was like a similar challenge there because, they're clearing rights for individual photographs and assets, but they're also tracking the artwork rights and permissions in a different system, and probably, a bunch more stuff outside somewhere else that I don't know about. But yeah, I'm trying to think. And then in terms of just like the speed, I think like things can happen faster, and it's okay. So trying to push and pull what I've learned from both experiences in terms of how to scope something to be small enough so that people see like an immediate impact, and then having like really large ideas coming from a mature system where I could see how all the data is connecting and like visualize it in the ecosystem in my brain that I was just in for so long, and like trying to kind of reel myself in and like rein it in. So I'm like, okay, just tags this week, so I think definitely like the speed at which we can work could come back to the museums. Like it's okay to kind of experiment too. I feel like sometimes people were like a little, so just like you were saying, Jessica, like, taking a chance and it being okay to kind of fail at one thing and like rethink and figuring out how to frame that for people so that they stay engaged too. Like, so talking about working iteratively and getting feedback without asking them to do too much labor. And that's definitely a balance that I'm still trying to strike, but it's a goal that's driving me forward.
We actually got a good question from Kristen Waterbury. She says, Jessica talked a little bit about digital archiving versus digital asset management. I'd like to hear more from the panel about how decisions are made, about what remains in the dams versus what gets archived, and also how these processes affect digital preservation of the assets. So this is for everyone.
I'll jump in for a second. So the way our system works, it is connected both to a public digital library where we can adjust permissions for the public, but also leave permissions so they're some assets are private, but that same system connects to our digital archiving infrastructure, which is a different system, but they're connected. So when we do ingestion, we can choose to only publish to the digital library, or publish to the digital library and go to archive, or only to archive. And so with our collections material that is not okay, let me step back a second. So we have some collections material that is reposited from federal sites, and other state sites. And so some of that information cannot be publicly available. We don't want looting and whatnot, right? So some of that information cannot be public. And so making those decisions is tricky. We know that we want all of that information archived because we are obligated to these agencies. But then we have things like our field notes, which are essentially like journals of being out in the field, finding things. There are little bits of poetry in them. They're really delightful, but they haven't had a home in our collections management systems because they're not necessarily considered scientific data, or haven't in the past. But they're extremely useful for context or connecting to certain types of objects we have in our collection. And so that's one of the first collections we added to our digital asset management system, because we had no other way to share it. And so we had a transcription process, and because we had nowhere else to share it, we started from the very beginning. It was digitized, it was transcribed, it was published to the digital library and automatically archived, because we didn't have it anywhere else.
Wow, that is a dream for many people.
Yeah, we're going to do something similar. The dams that I'm working in now supports a bunch of different storage tiers in AWS. So you can have it save in like everything automatically gets saved into S3, but then you can push it into Deep Archive, which is a much less expensive storage tier. And so for now, depending on what something is, like like all of the raw footage from the Live from Lincoln Center episode, for example, doesn't need to be stored on S3 if no one's licensing or going back to that raw footage, like very infrequently, although it's important IP to the institution. So we'd probably put that into like, you know, a less expensive, less accessible storage tier and still have proxies available if we need to review that media, but they're much smaller and cheaper to store.
Are you doing, Milo, are you doing that automatically, manually, or is that like a configuration, you know, something over, you know, a gig or something like that is automatically pushed to a cold storage?
It's not automatic because we have a lot of raw video being ingested to the system. So that would accident or potentially inadvertently, you know, put that into deep storage, which we don't want. But right now it's controlled mostly manually, but just in a separate section. So I know like everything in this area that, or like by series, like everything for this series that's no longer happening or happening in a different configuration at the institution, you know, is going into Deep Archive, except for like the primary file that I know that we get license requests for frequently, because I don't want to have to pull that back and have them wait. But any of the like raw materials attached to it are less frequently accessed. Generally manually right now.
We've got a couple minutes left, so any final thoughts before we close for this morning or this afternoon? We don't have any other questions from the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, all three of you. This has been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate you guys taking time out of your days to, you know, join us for this webinar series. Thank you for everyone who's attended, asked questions, participated in the chat, and listening to the recording. We'll be back with a discussion on digital preservation and access in our next episode. Please follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter if you'd like to be informed of future webinars. I hope everyone has a fabulous week, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Take care.